with my favorite boss, which is the Prism Breaker, because he's got some really lovely mechanics, and obviously I'm very excited to share them with you. Please excuse me if the camera's shaking a little bit. It's attached to the table, and I'm trying my best not to knock the table. So our heroes have spawned over here and our boss has spawned over there. First thing we need to look at on this boss then is some of his abilities, but we don't have time to read them all, so I'm just going to come in and basically tell you guys, this boss has got an ability here called Splitting Death. And Splitting Death says when you die, you don't officially die, you split into 2 fragments. These are mini boss boards. So, and it tells us in that text there that this boss is not defeated until all versions of the Prism Breaker are defeated. These 2, it tells us here, Splitting Death. When each one of these dies, you'll never guess what, guys. We got the Russian doll effect. Each one of those will split into 2. So you can potentially have 4 of these on the battlefield. Okay, so it's a Russian doll mechanic where one dies, another one spawns, another 2 spawns, sorry, and then another 2 would spawn from that. So it's that sort of cascading effect. Now, let's get to the combat map. So up here, we've got some additional boss mechanics. This boss, thematically, look at him. He's pretty chunky, he's pretty heavy. You can see that gorgeous standee as well there. He can't be pushed or pulled, okay? So that makes a big difference. You'll see why in a moment. It tells us when the Splitting Death ability triggers, it tells us that the next monsters will spawn adjacent to him, okay? It also tells us up here as well, is when Splitting Death triggers, so when the monster is defeated, each phase of the monster is defeated, this first one, these 2, and that would be it actually, because these don't split. There's no Splitting Death on those. So it would just be when this one's defeated and when these 2 are defeated. The adjacent hexes to them receive 50 undefendable damage. So what that means is if the Shadow Knight is a melee hero and he wants to get in on the action, and he probably does, because if he's adjacent over here, he gets a +2 attack modifier on all his melee attacks. And the majority of his spells are melee. You'd expect that, since he's got a big sword in his standee. Okay, so if he's over here, he's doing some attacks, and the boss is about to split. Let's say it's got 1 health left, for example. The clairvoyant is not going to kill that boss, because if she does, adjacent hexes will all receive 50 undefendable damage. Now, 50 undefendable damage, we've done this intentionally because none of our heroes have 50 HP, so that would actually defeat a hero outright. There are ways that you can get around that. If you can put damage immunity on yourself, pop it on him and then blow up the boss, then you don't have to worry about that mechanic. Okay, and then the last but not least, there's 2 more mechanics actually. One of them is at the end of his turn, he always pulls an enemy towards him. So at the end of his turn here, he would pull the clairvoyant into this hex here. Okay, and then can you see up here that we've got this yellow X pattern? Okay, now what that tells us is that each version of the Prism Breaker boss emits a barrage of light ability. Now anybody stood on one of these hexes in that shape of the X over here will receive 4 undefendable damage. If it's an ally stood in that hex, it's the opposite. They'll gain 4 HP. Okay, so let's just assume it's the end of the Prism Breaker's turn. He will pull the clairvoyant in 1 hex towards him, and then beginning of his next turn, if the clairvoyant hasn't moved, you can see here, if I turn the standee up right there, that the barrage is going to go to these hexes here. I think I had a ruler somewhere. Here we go. So it'll go to these hexes here, and you can see that she is, there we go. She is in the line. They'll all receive 4 damage, so she'd take 4 damage, and then the X would also as well go to these hexes here, and there's none in the way there, and they would take 4 damage. But remember, we've only got 1 of these on the map at the moment. So when we kill this one, and it splits into 2, this is where it gets fun. Yes, they do get weaker, but the map gets more complicated. So now we have another one spawn. This one will spawn adjacent, so let's go ahead and pop him over here. Okay, now remember, at the beginning of a Prism Breaker's turn, we've got that barrage of light. So this one is going to emit that barrage of light in that X shape up here. This one on his turn is going to emit that barrage of light as well. Now, at the end of their, at the end of their turn, they also pull an enemy 1 hex in towards them. So if this one pulls in and this one could pull in, you can see how when these start to split, and can you imagine if there's 4 of them, you know, I don't know, 1 over here, 1 over here, you've got 4 of these barrages going off over here. They would all go off independently on that character's turn, and that's all based on their agility stats, so it wouldn't all happen at once. Okay, and then you've got all of them pulling you 1 hex towards them. Now the pull is really important because some of the movement cards allow the heroes and the enemies to place some status effects, we call them conditions in our game, on the map. So let's go ahead and place let's say we got some knockback conditions there, and they're on the map for 2 turns. Now, of course, if this was this example here, and it was this Prism Breaker's turn here, he's going to go ahead and pull 1 of them towards him. The closest enemy we've got here is the Clairvoyant. She's going to get pulled into this hex. She would take that knockback token and place it on her board. Okay, so you can see where that pull mechanic towards all of these guys is quite detrimental, especially when there's tokens on the map. And the other thing is, don't forget, these 2 still have that splitting death ability, and remember, if you are adjacent to them, you take 50 undefendable damage. So there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of strategy. You've got to be moving around, making sure that you're not adjacent to the enemies when you defeat them, otherwise you're going to go down quite quickly with the we're over here with the splitting death. Sorry, yeah, when you're adjacent to them, the splitting death will deal 50 undefendable damage. Now, there's one other thing to talk about on this specific boss map. We've got a key down here to tell us what this yellow hex is. Well, this is sort of pale yellow hex here. There's 1 there, there's 1 there, and there's 1 there. And then surrounding those, you can see there's some green hexes here. So the green hexes are called a crystal oasis. And it says here, when a hero moves into this hex, they receive glowing for 3 turns. So basically, if a hero wants to get to this light crystal hex, which I'll talk about in a moment, they, most of the time, unless they can make their way round to this one, they are probably going to have to cross over the crystal oasis. Now, of course, remember, enemies will be pulling them towards them. So if they're getting pulled through these crystal oases, they're always going to have this glowing condition on them, which we'll get into that another time, but effectively when they heal, they lose damage because the enemies are glowing. But what's this hex? And this hex is important. This is called a light crystal, and it tells us here, when a hero is on a light crystal hex, that they do not receive any damage from the barrage of light ability. Now this X ability over here, that was the barrage of light. Okay, so if the boss is here, so let's say the boss is there, he's going to emit a barrage, and normally it would hit this hex here. So the Clairvoyant would normally take 4 undefendable damage. Now, because she's on a light crystal hex, it tells us here she does not receive any damage, but instead she charges the light crystal and it bounces the light in the direction of the arrow. So actually, in this example, let's just say the Shadow Knight was over here and the Clairvoyant was here. The barrage of light normally would not hit the Shadow Knight. You can see that it's not in the X shape at all. He's nowhere near it. He's safe. However, because the Clairvoyant is on the crystal, she won't receive any damage, but she'll charge the light and bounce that damage back over this way. So unfortunately, you can see here, it'll go to there. Let me grab my ruler. So it'll come to this hex, and then the light will bounce all the way up to there, and the Shadow Knight would take 4 undefendable damage. Okay, it does tell us here on these crystals that Prism Breakers can also receive damage this way. So this is a super fun, super engaging map of making sure that you're trying to get to these crystals, because when it comes to their turn, it's at the beginning of their turn, so they don't get a chance to move. Okay, they'll move during their main phase, but at the beginning of their turn is when they emit the barrage. So when they emit the barrage on your turn, if you can get to a crystal and you can try to get these guys positioned in the way of these crystals, it's another nice way of you dealing additional damage to them as well. Okay, That is, I think that's pretty much it for this boss. We've got the little smaller versions. You can see they've only got 20 health and 5 defense, so you'll be able to get through these quite fast, especially if you've got some area of attack effects that can hit, 3 of them in one big go. If you, playing the Hydromancer or even the Clairvoyant, on average they can hit for maybe 10, somewhere between 10 to 15 damage on a big AoE. So you can kill these in a couple of turns, but you've got all these really fun, rewarding, exciting mechanics going on. Do you use the crystals to try and charge them to avoid damage from the barrage? If you're low at health, you kind of sometimes won't have a choice. You'll have to get to these crystals. But remember, in doing so, you'll have to cross the oasis most of the time, which will put glowing on you. So that means when the enemies gain health, and remember, the enemies will be gaining health if they're stood in the way of their own barrages. Okay. So I'm going to pause the video here quickly, and I'm going to set up the next boss so we can jump into that one.